Photographers from major news agencies like Reuters, Getty, and the Associated Press have been banned from briefings on the war with Iran.
Really? Photographers?
Yeah.
Must be a good reason, though.
The Washington Post reports the decision is in response to photos taken of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth during the first briefing held on March 2nd. The secretary's aides were reportedly unhappy with what they felt were unflattering pictures circulated by the photographers. In the two briefings since then, on March 4th and 10th, photographers have been completely shut out of the room. The Pentagon defended the decision, saying it would release official photos taken by Defense Department staff that can be used. The White House declined to comment.
Admiral, why didn't you get rid of photographers?
I wish I'd known that was an option.
There wasn't a flattering picture.
Because I have had plenty of unflattering photos.
I don't think photos are his problem. I think actual qualifications for the job and this grotesque talk about death and destruction and the need to sound strong, it's total, you can take a bad picture of Pete Hegseth if you want, but it's what comes out of his mouth that's the problem. He's totally overcompensating for something that's missing in his life.
Admiral.
Or just not the right size.
Thank you,
I don't
Madam
know
Admiral.
what. This is not a defense secretary. This is a joke.
Thank you, Madam Admiral. Admiral.
I'll say it so you don't have to.
You just did.
I think it's good that the Pentagon's been doing these briefings. I think it's important. They have an obligation to explain to the American people what they're doing with the men and women in uniform and our arms. So I think the briefings ought to continue. And I hope they reconsider this policy because I think it's self-defeating. I mean, it is about access and it's about transparency. And I don't think it helps the Pentagon in their efforts to communicate with the American people when they're taking legitimate photographers out of the room.
And it's not. And John, you've talked about the pool there, also the pool at the White House. Man, it's just you need to be asked the tough questions. You need to be able to have the answers to tough questions. That builds confidence. That builds up sort of a bank account of trust with the American people. And when you don't do that, you don't have that trust, that's when things in wars like this go south very quickly. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Churchill always was straight with the British people, got them through an extraordinarily difficult situation and helped save Western civilization. And Roosevelt said things are going to get much worse before they get much better. They were straight with the American people. You got to be straight with the American people. And this administration, they've got their rose-colored glasses on. That never works.
Yeah, it simply has not happened here. And the press restrictions to the Pentagon, extreme. But there have been some at the White House, too. Let's remember that the White House itself has hijacked the press pool. It used to be the Correspondents Association running it. Now the White House does. They stock it with far more friendly, right-leaning media outlets than before. And they love to boast about President Trump's transparency. And to be clear, he takes a lot of questions. He does. But they're usually shouted questions from the pool, often from friendly outlets. He started taking a lot of reporters' phone calls, but they're relatively brief, and he can end them whenever he wants. So there's therefore no ability for follow-up tough questions. He did hold a news conference the other day, but it was his first one in months in terms of taking substantive questions from the expanded press. So there's simply not an opportunity.
Well, and by the way, let's just say Joe Biden was not accessible either, but Donald Trump criticized Joe Biden for not holding regular press conferences. And, now if he's doing it, a lot of times the Mr. Pillow reporter literally gets a question before the New York Times
that happened at the Pentagon
or the Wall Street
That happened at the Pentagon the other day. Lindell TV, Mr. Pillow's media company, got a reporter, was one of the White House, one of the Pentagon, got a question before the New York Times. And we were, frankly, surprising that the New York Times even got a question at all. But you're right. Certainly, there were criticisms levied at President Biden in terms of not taking questions. President Trump, by the numbers, takes more, but it's rare when he fields a challenging question, and it's even rarer when he and his administration answer it transparently and honestly.
And as you say, it's a sign of weakness to not be able to take questions.
Right.
If you can only listen to friendly questions and you're so concerned that your hair doesn't look good in a photograph that you get rid of the photographers, that's not what people want to see in the midst of a war.
And again,
I would argue.
During the 24 campaign, what did you hear time and again from Republicans and from the political press? That Kamala Harris couldn't go into tough interviews. She wouldn't put herself in a situation enough where so that was their criticism of Kamala Harris. Now you have Mr. Pillow asking questions, and, there's just not there's not the transparency of having a Wall Street Journal reporter.
And it's not just about the transparency. I think it's about good policy making. I always felt that the press conferences in particular, whether it was Pentagon State or at the White House, the scrutiny you get from an independent media who are unafraid and know that they can ask whatever they want, that helps decision makers. When they see how the press is reporting an issue, when they hear the questions coming on a daily basis, it does help make policy making better. It helps it make it more informed. And so I feel like the policy making in general suffers when you aren't getting tough questions from independent press.
Retired Rear Admiral John Kirby, it's always good to see you.